What's up? It's Andy Grammer with Jag.
Hi, this is Carly Rae Jepsen, and you're listening to Jag.
Hey everybody, it's Joe Jonas hanging with Jag.
This is Heather Knox with the hottest Jag I've ever seen.
Ryan Seacrest with Jag.
It's B.O.B. checking in with my homie Jag. So much swag with my homie Jag.
It's the Jag Show Podcast.
Welcome in, I am John Jag Gay. Yesterday, I listened to the Michelle Obama podcast. It is exclusive to Spotify, and before we get into things, full disclosure, I won't get too political here, but I do love the Obamas and miss them. Wanted to break down what I thought of the episode, though, and overall, I thought episode 1 was really good. I think they probably could have deleted a few of the ums and ahs, but that's a matter of personal preference. In terms of flow, I would say that Michelle and her first guest, Barack Obama, who else would you have as your first guest if you're Michelle Obama? They did interrupt each other a little bit, and there were times that I wasn't sure who was interviewing who, but I think that comes with knowing somebody so well and being in a good marriage. In a good marriage, you finish each other's sentences. I'm sure it'd be similar if I did a show with my wife, if I could ever get her near a microphone. In the larger picture, the show featured music from Stevie Wonder, who I think may have created music for the show, and if I'm not mistaken, there might have been a Beyonce beat in the trailer for the show, so I'm curious how much of that is the fact that it's on Spotify and they have access to this music library, or how much is the fact that they're the Obamas and they could ask anybody for anything and get it, or maybe a function of both. It'd be nice if the industry got to a point where availability for music and podcasts was a bit more commonplace. I don't think Stevie Wonder is going to cut a custom piece of music for me, but it'd be nice if I wanted to use Superstition if there was an actual way to go about doing it. And in terms of substance of the podcast, I did enjoy the interview. Of course, I think Barack and Michelle are both very engaging speakers, and I was drawn into their stories about their backgrounds and how it shaped their value systems. I thought that was really well done. And I'll be honest, there were a few not-so-subtle digs at Mr. Obama's successor, and I may have enjoyed that. All right, let's get to other nonpartisan podcasting news this week. A lot of this comes from Pod News, Podcast Business Journal, and Podmove Daily. Speaking of Spotify, we'll start with them. They're making memes of podcasts that link back to the show. They're calling them visual quote cards, but essentially they're memes. They're a quote from the show that you can click back to and link and listen to the show in Spotify. Link to more information on that in our show notes. There is a report that people are working around Spotify's music licensing restrictions by uploading their content to the podcast section of Spotify, not the music section of Spotify. Much less oversight there. Kind of a loophole that some people have found. We'll see how quickly Spotify is able to close said loophole. I won't bore you with the details, but Spotify's earnings call had a lot of info about revenue and podcasts, and they also said they now have more podcasts on their platform than Apple does. Link to that in the show notes. Descript, which is a platform that I have used to do a little bit of podcast editing, a little bit of automated editing, taking out ums and ahs and things like that. I've found it to be pretty good, but not nearly as good as a human touch. And anything I use automated AI for, I always go through with a fine-tooth comb manually. But Descript's new feature is called Overdub. Theoretically, you can insert a speaker saying something into a podcast without having to re-record it. This is really interesting. Basically, they have you read a whole bunch of stuff, maybe hours of material in some cases, so they can get a cadence for your voice and how you say different words and things along those lines. And if they can build enough of a database of your voice and your inflection, if you wanted to make a small edit and insert a sentence into a podcast, this overdub technology will theoretically use your voice. Now, I haven't tried it yet. I can't speak to how it works, but James Cridlin from Pod News used it and said he finds it useful for some small edits and things here and there. I don't think we're to the point where you could do an entire podcast that way, but little small sentences here and there might happen. Overdub from Descript. And finally, of note to car enthusiasts, after all, I am Jag in Detroit, Ford is launching an 8-episode podcast about the story behind bringing back the Ford Bronco. Not sure if they'll touch on the big oops when they decided to release it on OJ's birthday. But hell, it did get them a lot of press. Coming up on Tuesday, we're talking about the PodFest Global Summit with their Chief Creative Officer, the great Chris Kremitzos. He was nice enough to take about 15 minutes out of his day with us on Thursday, and you can hear our conversation coming up this Tuesday. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe, have a great weekend. Later.
Thanks for listening to the Jag Show podcast. If you like what you heard, be sure to subscribe in Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. New episodes are published every Tuesday and Friday morning. For help with your podcast, Find Jag on social media at Jag in Detroit or on the web at jagindetroit.com.